And as you know, can you imagine time of year, the giving of the Torah? How exciting. When you look at your notes here, Deuteronomy chapter 16 and verse 16. 3 times in the year shall all your males appear before the Lord your God in the place which he's going to choose. Okay, and it was at the feast of matzah, or unleavened bread, the feast of Shavuot, or weeks, and in the feast of Sukkot, or tabernacles. Why was it a command for the males and not the females? It never says that the women have to appear 3 times. It says the men have to appear 3 times. Who can tell me why he commanded the men and not the women? The men have to be told what to do. In other words, if the men are farmers and they're out farming the field, their importance is making the money. I got to do the field, and if I go, who's going to protect it? Okay? But tell you what, if all the men go, all the women are going to go anyway. Okay, because the women love to socialize. They're going to be there whether they were commanded to or not. You don't have to command the women. They'll say, hey, let's do it. We love to party. Okay? But God had to tell the men that if you all go, you don't have to worry about protecting your property. I mean, if you were an enemy, wouldn't you want to invade when the town is empty? Can you imagine towns all over Israel completely empty? Everyone's in Jerusalem. But God said, if you do these things, I'll make sure the enemy stays away. And we find in Leviticus chapter 23, verse 17, it says you have to bring out of your habitations 2 loaves of bread, fine flour, and they have to be baked with what? Okay, how come Passover is unleavened and Shavuot is leavened? And why 2 loaves? Can anybody tell me why Passover was unleavened and Pentecost is leavened? Because the Feast of Unleavened Bread is all about the Messiah who was without sin. And the Feast of Shavuot is all about Gentiles and Jews. That's why there's 2 loaves and we are both leavened. Neither one of us have got it totally figured out. Okay, so the Jews and Gentiles, 2 loaves of leavened bread, come together, which is also speaking of Jew and Gentiles coming together. And then look at Leviticus 23. It goes on to say in verse 20 and 21, the priest has to wave them with the bread of the first fruits for a wave offering before the Lord, and they have to have 2 lambs. They'll be holy to the Lord for the priest, and you have to proclaim on the very same day that it may be a holy convocation. Now, what does convocation really mean? In Hebrew, it's a mikra, but what is a better English translation? An appointment, but for mikra, it's a dress rehearsal. Just like Passover, well, just like if you have a wedding, you have a wedding rehearsal before the wedding. Passover was a dress rehearsal every year for 1,500 years. They would do the dress rehearsal for the time when Messiah would actually die. You have to think in terms of all the feasts were dress rehearsals. Can you imagine? Every year they would bind the Passover lamb at the time of the morning sacrifice, which is 9 in the morning, and at the very same moment they're binding Yeshua to the cross. And they're singing Psalm 118 at the very same time. So for 1,000 years, they did the rehearsal of the funeral hymn that God had David write, and they're going through all of the motions, and then it's the real event, and most of them don't get it. You would think after 1,500 years of rehearsing, killing the lamb at 3, and Messiah dies at 3, Okay, everything was a dress rehearsal. So why does God want all of the Jews in Israel, the males, Passover, Pentecost, and Tabernacles? He wanted them all to witness Messiah's death. He wanted them all to witness the Spirit being poured out. And now in the last days, there's the great ingathering because he wants them all to see the return of the Messiah. Okay, so that's why he's doing it for 3 times. We have to realize they're dress rehearsals. Now, here's another thing. In the Brit Hadashah, or the New Testament, it talks about the Spirit being poured out on the feast of Shavuot or Pentecost. And there's a big problem with replacement theology. The church thinks it began in Acts on the feast of Pentecost, not realizing the Jews were the first Pentecostals. They've been keeping Pentecost for 1,500 years. And look at what it says in Acts chapter 2. It says, when the day of Shavuot or Pentecost was fully come, they were all with one accord in one place. Where was the one place they were all in? The temple. They weren't in an upper room. They were in the temple. And they were dwelling at Jerusalem, who? What a concept. They were devout men out of what? Why were there Jews in Jerusalem out of every nation? They had to be there. It was the Feast of Pentecost. It was the Feast of Shavuot. Well, this is important. I will say why in just a little bit. Look at verse 2 and 3. It says, suddenly there came a sound from heaven as of a rushing mighty wind. It filled the house where they were sitting. That means the temple. And there appeared to them cloven tongues like fire, and it sat upon each one of them. Now look at verse 15. Peter says, these guys aren't drunk. It's the 3rd hour of the day. What time is the 3rd hour of the day? 9 in the morning, the time of the morning sacrifice. Now, what's amazing, the Jews to this day still keep Shavuot. They stay up all night. They read the book of Exodus. They read the book of Ruth. And I don't know any Pentecostals who keep Pentecost. And yet they claim that is the foundation of their religion. But they don't even know when Pentecost is half the time. And if they do, it's on the wrong calendar. And so people need to realize in the book of Acts, when all these 3,000 got saved, they weren't 3,000 pagans that were worshiping at a pagan temple that got zapped. These were Jews. There wasn't a pagan among them, okay? And they were all in the temple. You're not going to have Gentiles unless they were converts or God-fearers, okay? And so most of those who were getting saved were Jews. And look at verse Acts 2, chapter 15. We said it was the 3rd hour of the day. Now look at verse 16 and 18. Peter stands up. And he says, this is what was spoken by the prophet Joel, that it'll come to pass in the last days. God said, I will pour out my spirit on all flesh. Your sons, your daughters will prophesy. Your young men will see visions, and your old men shall dream dreams. And on my servants and on my handmaidens, I will pour out in those days, my spirit, and they shall prophesy. Wow, okay, so they're connecting the dots. The first thing they're doing is they're reaching back to the Tanakh and say, wow, prophecy is being filled. Now, most Christians aren't aware of this, but it is taught within Judaism. Back in Exodus 19, God spoke the Torah in every language, all 70 languages. In Jeremiah, God says, is not my word like a fire? It's like a hammer that breaks the rocks in pieces. So you can think of a ironsmith and he's hitting on it and sparks are flying everywhere. It is taught that sparks of fire landed on every head of the Jews in Exodus 19. Now that's not in the Bible, but it's what they've been taught forever. And every night they read the book of Ruth, or all night, and the book of Ruth is about Jew and Gentiles coming together. All right, so this wasn't the first time that the Jews were keeping Shavuot. Now, look at Acts 2:21. This is a mind blower. This is when you think about it. Peter goes on and he says, it'll come to pass, whoever shall call on the name of the Lord shall be. Okay, now wait a minute. What's the Hebrew word for Lord here? Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. So if the Jews call on the Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, will they be saved? I mean, just something to think about. Okay, Jesus wasn't his name back then. There were no J's in Hebrew, no J's in Greek, and English didn't come around for over 700 years later. And he's saying everyone who calls upon the name of the Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh will be saved. And then look at Acts 2:41. Those that gladly received his word were baptized the same day. There were added to them about 3,000 souls. They were all Jews. These were all Jews. And look at Acts 4:4. Howbeit many of them which heard the word believed, and the number of the men was about what? And they were all Jews. And that doesn't count the women. There were a whole lot of women as well. But we have to realize most Christians think these were all Gentiles. Like 90% of them were Jews. There may have been a handful of Gentiles. As a matter of fact, look at Acts chapter 6, verse 7. It says, the word of God increased, the number of the disciples multiplied in Jerusalem greatly, and the great company of the priests were obedient to the faith. Do you know what that meant? That meant the sacrificial system was still going on for 40 years, and they were still doing sacrifices, and all of those followers of Yeshua had no problem with them doing Passover every year. The reasons the sacrifices stopped is not because God wanted them stopped, but the temple was destroyed. You following me? Okay. Now look at Acts 2:46. It says, and they continuing daily with one accord, where? In the temple. So many people teach they only met house to house, and they weren't in the temple. No, they met every day in the temple. And then here is a big error. It says baking bread from house to house, yes, but that doesn't mean they didn't daily meet in the temple. They ate their meat with gladness and singleness of heart. They praised God. They had favor with everybody, and the Lord added to the, not church, but the assembly, daily, such as should be saved. There were no churches. This may be hard to believe. There were no churches in the New Testament. There were assemblies. Okay, names are important. Names are important. There were assemblies, but how many of you believe there was a Catholic church on every corner in Jerusalem? There were no Catholic churches. Protestant churches didn't even come until, Martin Luther in the 1500s. So how could we say there was a church? No, they were assemblies. Okay, now here's something that is also mistranslated in every New Testament. It's in Acts 3:1. Oh, let me go here. Okay, here. You have massive amounts of people at the temple. Okay? But here, there's the man who's lame in his feet. He always had to be carried up. And look at this. It says in Acts 3:1, Peter and John went up together to the temple at the hour of prayer. That's what every translation says. But do you know that is wrong? It's at the hour of the prayer. Now, when you say the prayer, that means it's a specific prayer. What prayer were they praying? The Amidah. And the Amidah means to what? To stand. So here's a guy who's over 40 years old that's never been able to stand for the standing prayer. That's what we miss. And he's been wanting to stand for the standing prayer. And it says at the 9th hour, what is the 9th hour? 3 PM, time of the evening sacrifice. Everyone's going to be at the temple. And there was a certain man who was lame from birth. He was carried, whom they laid how often? Daily at the gate of the temple. This is the eastern gate, which is called Beautiful, to ask of alms. Now, Look at Acts 4:22. The man was above 40 years old on whom this miracle of healing was showed. Do you know what that means? He's older than Yeshua was. And he was laid daily at the eastern gate. Jesus' entire life, whenever he went into the temple through the eastern gate, he never healed the guy. He just waved and smiled. Think about that for a minute. Here, this poor guy, lame from his birth, and Yeshua never heals him. He's waiting for an appointed time so that he would be healed at the time of the standing prayer after he rose for an impact. Now, watch this. Acts 3:7-8. He took him by the right hand. He lifted him up. Immediately his feet and ankle bones received strength, and he leaping up, what did he do? And Christians don't get this. They don't understand. They're praying the Amidah, the standing prayer, and that's why the big emphasis is he stood. And then he walked, and he entered with them into the temple, walking and leaping and praising God. Well, guess what? If he's been laid daily at the gate for 40 years, everyone's going to recognize him. And now he's walking and leaping and standing for the standing prayer. Now, here's what's amazing. In Acts 3:12, when Peter saw it, he answered to the people, and he says, "You men of Israel, why are you marvel at this? Why are you looking so earnestly at us as though our power or our holiness we made this man to walk?" Wow, look at this guy. Peter and John aren't trying to take the power. It was by our power, or it's because we're so holy. They were humble. As a matter of fact, what's amazing about this, they just got done praying the Amidah. And who in the Amidah is all power and holiness given to? Look at here it is. We have the entire Amidah as handouts for those of you that don't have it. But here's one of the prayers. It's called the Sanctification of God. And this is what they just got done praying. We will sanctify your name in the world, even as they sanctified in the heavens, as it is written by the hand of your prophet. And they called out to one another, and what did they say? Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. Blessed be the glory of the Lord from his place. And in your holy words it is written, saying, the Lord reigns forever, your God, O Zion, to all generations. Praise you, the Lord. Unto all generations we're going to proclaim what? Your greatness, your power, and to all of eternity, we're going to tell of your holiness, your praise, O our God, will not cease from our mouth, for you are great and the holy God and King. Blessed are you, O Lord, the holy God. You are holy. Your name is holy. Holy ones praise you every day. Blessed are you, the holy Lord, the holy God. And then he says, are you thinking we did this by our power or our holiness? Did you listen to what we just prayed? But wait, there's more. Look at this. In Acts 3, it goes on, and Peter says, the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, the God of our fathers, has glorified his son Yeshua, whom you delivered up and denied him in the presence of Pilate when he was determined to let you go. Okay, in Acts 3:13, how does he begin the sentence? With the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of your fathers. Well, guess what? They just got done praying in the Amidah. Look, the God of history. Blessed are you, O Lord, our God, and God of our fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Do you see the Amidah is all through this event that happened at the time of the Amidah? It says, the great, mighty, and revered God, the Most High God, you bestow loving kindness. The creator of all things remembers the good deeds of the patriarchs, and in love came as a redeemer to their children's children for your name's sake. O King, helper, savior, and shield, blessed are you, Lord, the shield of Abraham. You know, the other thing I don't have mentioned here, but they always pray, is the God of healing. And they're praying, God, heal your people Israel. And here the guy gets healed. Now, here's another verse that I believe is truly amazing. Acts 3, verse 19 through 23. He's still talking. And he says, repent therefore and be converted, Now, you have to realize when he says be converted, he's not saying become Christians. And he's not saying become Gentiles. Okay? He's saying you need to repent and come back to the Father. Okay? And then he says, so that your sins will be blotted out when the times of refreshing shall come from the presence of the Lord. Now, a lot of people miss this. Look very carefully at these next words. Where did Yeshua go? He's ascended where? Up into heaven. And look what he says. Whom the heavens, must receive until the times of the restitution of what? Wow, which God spoken by the mouth of all his holy prophets since when? Oh my goodness. You know what that means? Messiah is not coming back until the restoration of all things. He went up to heaven, and this is saying, guess what? He's not going to return until the restitution of all things. This is why my mission is to restore the calendar and the times and the seasons of the Bible. Does that make sense? People have to understand the times and the seasons. And then it says, since the world began, we got a lot of restoring to do. And then it says, for Moses truly has said to the fathers, a prophet shall the Lord your God raise up to you of your brethren like me. So that meant this prophecy of a Messiah, he's supposed to be like Moses, right? Is that what this is saying? That Moses said? Moses wouldn't abolish the Torah. And then it says, him you shall hear in all things, whatever he'll say to you, and it'll come to pass that every soul which won't hear that prophet will be destroyed from among the people. Well, I think that's pretty incredible. To the Jewish mind, he's saying, hey, you got to return back to the Messiah. Things aren't linear, they're circular, okay? And we got to go back to the beginning, which is why God declared the end from the beginning. It is circular. Look at Acts 3, verse 26 through 42. It says, unto you first, God, having raised up his son, now see, again, Yeshua, I don't know if you really got that. His son, not Joseph's son, not Mary's son, not Adam's son, not Noah's son, not Abraham's son, not David's son. He's the only son who was birthed of the Father. Okay, and let me see. Wait a second. Let me see. Yeah. Sent to him to bless you. And how does he bless you? In turning every one of you away from his iniquities. And as they spoke to the people, the priests, the captain of the temple, the Sadducees, remember the Sadducees don't believe in a resurrection, came upon them being grieved that they taught the people and preached through Yeshua the resurrection of the dead. Now, you have to realize it was the Sadducees, not the Pharisees. The Pharisees totally believed in the resurrection of the dead. But the Sadducees controlled the temple, and the priests were, for the most part, Sadducees. Now, here's the next thing that is amazing in the Amidah. Now, how often do they pray the Amidah? 3 times a day, okay? 9 in the morning, noon, and then 3 at the time of the evening sacrifice. Do you remember when Yeshua is in the grave for 3 days and 3 nights? The disciples, are scared to death. They're in the upper room, and they are in the upper room for 3 days, all right? And what are they doing? Praying. Do you think they're praying the Amidah 3 times a day? Of course they are. What are they praying 3 times a day for the 3 days Yeshua's in the grave. Let's look at the Amidah. They also pray the God of nature. Listen to what they're praying. You, O Lord, are mighty forever. You revive the dead. So they're praying, come on, God, raise Jesus. Raise him, raise him. And then it says, you have the power to save. You cause the wind to blow, the rain to fall. You sustain the living with loving kindness. You revive the dead. 3 times a day, you revive the dead with great mercy. Okay? You support the falling. You heal the sick, set free the bound, and keep faith with those who are sleeping in the dust. Hello? Where are you, Father? Who is like you, O doer of mighty acts? Who resembles you, a king who puts to death and restores to life and causes salvation to flourish, and you are certain to revive the dead. Blessed are you, O Lord, who revives the dead. Can you imagine how earnestly they were praying that 3 times a day during the days that he was in the grave? Well, here's what's amazing. In Hebrew, where it says, cause salvation to flourish, this is not the best English translation. What is the Hebrew word for salvation? And to flourish, that refers to Aaron's rod that budded and was resurrected. 3 times a day they were praying, who causes Yeshua to resurrect. That's what they literally were saying in Hebrew. Revive the dead, revive the dead. You're the one who causes Yeshua to resurrect. I believe this is what they were praying when he walked in the door and said, hello. Wow. This is mind-blowing. But this is why I love praying the Amidah. And we have the copies of it. This prayer is 2,300 years old, which means Yeshua prayed this very same prayer 3 times a day his entire life. So it's an incredible prayer, and we want everyone to always have it, and we'll pray the whole thing tomorrow at our Shavuot picnic. Okay, now, again, here we are at Exodus 23, and let's look at verses 14 through 16. Just like in Deuteronomy, it says 3 times you have to keep a feast to me in the year. Now look at this. You're to keep the feast of matzah. You have to eat unleavened bread 7 days, just as I command you, and it had to be at the appointed time in spring, for in it is when you came out of Egypt, and you better not come empty. Okay, so this refers to Passover and the spring. And then he says, and the feast of harvest, and this is now Passover is the barley harvest, and the summer is the wheat harvest. And so now he says that you have to also come at Shavuot, the Feast of Harvest, which is the first fruit of your labors that you sown in the field. And then he says the 3rd time you have to come is at the Feast of Ingathering, which is what feast? And Sukkot is in what month? September. Leave that September, October. But look what it says here, which is in the end of the year. So many Messianics get confused and they go, Nisan 1 is the first of the year, Tishri 1 is not the first of the year. Hello, they're both firsts. Nisan 1 is the first of the religious calendar, Tishri 1 is the first of the civil calendar. Israel has 4 calendars. Okay, just like we have a school calendar, a tax calendar. Okay, there's all kinds of calendars. It's okay to have more than one. But anyway, I just wanted you to notice that the Feast of Sukkot is the end of the year, and it's talking about the end of the civil year. So they had an end of the civil year, even during the time of Moses, and an end of a religious year. Now, look at this one. This one is mistranslated in English as well. But it says, when they heard it, they glorified the Lord and said to him, You see, brother, they're speaking to Paul, how many, not thousands, I think it says myriads in English, myriads, but the word literally doesn't mean thousands, it means tens of thousands. Look how many tens of thousands of pagans that are which believe. No, it's not the tens of thousands of Christians. It's not tens of thousands of pagans. It's tens of thousands of Jews. And look what it says. All of them are still zealous for Torah. It doesn't say, and they all decided to throw out the Torah. Wow, amazing. Okay, this brings us to Exodus 19, because this is what they would read every Shavuot, what actually happened. And it came to pass on the third day in the morning. I think it's interesting, that the third day is very significant all throughout the Bible. And it says, there were thunder and lightnings, a thick cloud on the mount, and the voice of a shofar. Wow, shofars have a voice. It was exceedingly loud. All the people in the camp were trembling. Mount Sinai was smoking because the Lord descended on it in fire. Okay, this is why in Acts on Pentecost, the fire descent, because that's what happened here. They also read Ezekiel every year, and look what it says. Ezekiel says, I looked, and behold, a whirlwind came out of the north, a great cloud, and a fire enfolding itself. Think of fire, same thing that happens, fire. And then look at chapter 3, verse 12 through 13. Look what happens. The Spirit took me up. I heard behind me a voice of great rushing. That sounds like the book of Acts. That's what they said. And they have, blessed be the glory of the Lord from his place. I heard also the noise of the wings of the living creatures that touched one another, and the noise of the wheels over against them, and the noise of great rushing. So here the Jews are reading this when it actually happens right in front of them. And now look at Ezekiel 36, 26 and 27. God is prophesying about an event that has not happened yet. And I believe that this prophecy will probably happen on a Yom Kippur. This is a Yom Kippur event. Look what it says. I am going to give you a new heart, a new spirit I'll put within you. I will take away the stony heart out of your flesh. I'll give you a heart of flesh. I'll put my spirit in you and cause you to walk in my statutes, and you shall keep my judgments and do them. And I really believe that this is going to happen some year. This will be the fulfillment of Yom Kippur. One of the things that's fascinating is when you study the ashes of the red heifer, God says, I'm going to bring you, and this happened in 1948. They all came back to Israel, but they were all communists, atheists. They may have been Zionists. They wanted the land, but they didn't really care about God. But now God is saying, and then I'm going to pour clean water upon you. This happens from the ashes of the red heifer. So this is why it's kind of exciting. They don't need a temple to do the red heifer. They need a red heifer to do the temple, but they don't need a temple to do the red heifer. And I believe prophetically, they're going to have a moment where they're going to reinstitute the red heifer, and I believe they will pour clean water on the Jewish people, and I believe many of them at that time, well, their eyes will be opened. Now, look at Isaiah 24, verse 5 and 6. The earth is defiled under the inhabitants. I just thought of this. Do you remember why the Canaanites were thrown out of the land of Israel? They had defiled the land of Israel. So God had to vomit them out, and he put Israel in it. And he warned Israel, if you defile it, the land's going to vomit you out. And that happened. And the Canaanites came back, and then the land vomited them out. And then Israel's returned to it. And they're being warned, this time you better follow me or it's going to vomit you out again. Well, here we see not just the land of Israel, but the entire earth is being defiled by humanity. And the earth is going to cast everybody out. When the Messiah comes, there's going to be a huge shake-up, wake-up call. Because it says they've transgressed the Torah. They've changed the ordinances. Not what a lot of Christianity has done, too. They broke the everlasting covenant. This is why the curse has devoured the earth, and those that dwell therein are desolate. Therefore, the inhabitants of the earth are burnt, and few men left. And in Revelation, it talks about God comes by fire. Matter of fact, if anyone loved God, it was David. Not only that, we all know David wasn't a saint. He was a murderer, adulterer. Just about everything bad he did. And yet, look what he writes in Psalm 119, verse 53. Horror has taken hold of me because the wicked that forsake your law. Wow, it's the wicked who forsake Torah. Now, the other book that the Jewish people read every Shabbat is the book of Ruth. Why? Look at Ruth chapter 2, verse 23. Ruth kept fast by the other ladies of Boaz to glean to the end of the barley harvest and of the wheat harvest, and dwelt with her mother-in-law. What is that saying? She worked through Passover to Pentecost. This is saying, and how many of you know Ruth and Orpah were Moabites, but they married into Israel. So think of Ruth and Orpah as the church grafted into Israel. Okay, well, what's amazing about that is all of a sudden Naomi's husband dies, her two sons die, so it's just Ruth and Orpah and Naomi. And Naomi hears there's bread in Bethlehem, or the house of bread. So she tells Ruth and Naomi, you go back to your pagan gods. I'm going to go to Jerusalem. And what did Orpah say? Orpah, now remember, Ruth and Orpah represent the church today. The book of Ruth is prophetic about today. Gentiles grafted in. Orpah, do you know what her name means? To turn your back on. The back of the neck. So Orpah gave the Jew a kiss, turned her back on her, and it says went back to her pagan gods. Ruth, whose name means friend, befriended the Jew, went to Jerusalem, worked the harvest, Passover, Pentecost, which is all that Christians know. So again, this represents the church. But Ruth ends up being the great grandma of David. But guess what? Orpah became the great grandma of Goliath. And so the last day church is going to be divided between the Goliath church and the Ruth church, who's woke and who's awake. Ruth, the awakened assembly, is going to take Israel's side and end up bringing the Messiah back. The church, like Orpah, represents all the traditional, just nominal Christianity who are going to turn from Israel, want it divided. So actually the book of Ruth is prophetic of today. Look at the book of Revelation, chapter 14, verse 18. Here another angel comes out from the altar, which had power over fire, and cried with a loud cry to him that had the sharp sickle, thrust in your sharp sickle, gather the clusters of the vine of the earth, for her grapes are fully ripe. What does that mean? What does that mean? Okay. Just as all the events of Passover happened in the spring, all the events of Pentecost happened in the summer, the tribulation in the book of Revelation is going to begin in the fall. That's why it says grapes. You don't read about barley and wheat in Revelation. This is telling you the second coming, everything is going to happen during the fall feasts. That's what this is saying. It's the grapes now. It's the time of the grape harvest. Now, How many of you believe God is the same yesterday, today, and forever? Do you believe it here or do you believe it in your heart? Okay. If he fulfilled the spring feast to the very day, he died on Passover, buried on unleavened bread, rose on first fruits, Shavuot on Shavuot, he'll fulfill the fall feast to the day of his second coming. And the next feast to be fulfilled is the Feast of Trumpets. Hello, anyone hear about trumpets in the book of Revelation? Okay, the tribulation is the next event to start. And then comes Yom Kippur. And what happens on Yom Kippur? That's when the Jews realize Yeshua is the Messiah. And that will happen on Yom Kippur. And then what happens? Sukkot. That's when God tabernacles among us. So this is why in Zechariah 14, everyone has to keep the Feast of Tabernacles, because for 1,000 years, he's ruling and reigning in Jerusalem on his birthday. That's when he was born. And that's when he's become king. And so, wow, if he's the same yesterday, today, and forever, he fulfilled the spring feast to the day. And remember, they were dress rehearsals. All the fall feasts have been dress rehearsals for what's coming to a planet near you. Okay. Now, how many of you know the prophet Daniel was Jewish? Is that a shock? Okay, how many have heard of Daniel's 70 weeks? Okay, those are Schmita weeks. Daniel did not keep the pagan Roman calendar. The whole reason they went into Babylon is they hadn't been keeping the Schmita year for 490 years and letting the land rest. So you know what that means. Daniel's 70th week is a Schmita week. So the tribulation has to start the beginning of a Schmita cycle. And if you don't know where we are in the Schmita cycle, you won't know when the tribulation would begin. So when does the next Schmita cycle begin? Come on. When does the next Schmita cycle begin? In the fall. It's always in the fall. That's when the year begins. But what year on the Gregorian calendar begins the next Schmita cycle? 2029. So the tribulation cannot start until the fall of 2029. And if it doesn't start then, I'm not saying it will, it can't start until the fall of 2036. We're supposed to know the times and the seasons. This is what I'm talking about. This is why in the back of the America at War, I have every Schmita year and every Jubilee year clear back to creation. You can simply look and see even when you were born. Where were you in the Schmita cycle? You can do your whole ancestry. Wow. But this is why we have to know the times and the seasons. And I believe we're like in the middle. We're like 3.5 years away from the fall of 2029. And this is one of the reasons why I say in this book prophetically, I believe we're going to have wars, chaos, because that is always what's going to come. And we need the man of the hour to take care of the problems. This is why this month of June, the UN is meeting twice with the sole purpose of dividing the land of Israel. That's what they want to do. And where the United States stands on that is going to determine what the rest of this year goes like, or next year. Because if you remember in Zechariah 1, the red horse of Revelation rides, which is war, which is, I believe, where we're at. And at the end of Zechariah 1, if you recall, Zechariah sees 4 horns on an altar, and those 4 horns, God says in Zechariah 1, represents the 4 entities that want to divide the land of Israel. And then he sees 4 carpenters who are coming to saw off the horns, and they are angelic messengers who God says are going to terrorize those who are terrorizing Israel. And who are those 4 entities? They started in 2001. It's the quartet whose sole purpose was to divide the land of Israel. And they're made up of the EU, the UN, the US, and Russia. And so all of them want to create a two-state solution this June. They're going to try to force it. All right. Israel may protest and say no, but who knows with what they might do with sanctions to Israel or militarily. So this is the month we really need to be praying for Israel. Amen? All right, let's stand and we'll close with prayer.